recorded for future viewing. It will assist the conduct of business if participants speak only when invited, so please only speak when you're invited. And reminder that members of the public are welcome to view the proceedings, but should not make contributions to the meeting. All members of the committee have received the reports in advance and had the opportunity to read them, and the reports are published on the internet. Can I please remind you, all participants, to mute your microphone and turn your video feed off if you're not speaking. It makes it a better meeting for everyone else. Anyone wishing to speak should indicate using the raise your hand button on Microsoft Teams, wherever that might be for you. And please remember to unmute your microphone and switch your video feed on when it's your turn to speak. Speak clearly and slowly into your microphone. If you don't have the hand button, please type your requests to speak in the chat function. Hopefully someone from Democratic Services is monitoring the chat as well and can give me a nod if that happens. And may I ask for everyone's patience with the use of the technology, and apologies in advance if we experience any unforeseen difficulties, which we'll try to resolve as soon as possible. So item 2, we've apologies for absence. I've got Councillor Cooper and Councillor Crumpton. Are there any others?
I think Councillor Cooper's in attendance.
Is it?
Oh, yeah, I'm here, Chris. Hello.
I'm sorry, I thought I'd seen.
And I'm here as well.
Somewhere. Okay.
And I'm here as well.
Yeah.
I think it mixed up with the date.
I think it might have been for the last meeting, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Cooper.
No, it's all right, don't worry.
Right. Okay.
I've received no apologies.
Okay.
And we just need to check Councillor Hilary Bill's capacity.
Yes, it was stubbing for Tim Crumpton.
Yes, I've got my hand up, Chair. I was just about to say I don't think I should be in this meeting then. If Tim is here.
There is a spare spot in the committee, but it hasn't been allocated. I'm not sure how that works, so I'll take advice from Democratic Services, please.
We do have a vacancy, but as you're substituting for Councillor Crumpton,
I will depart. Okay.
Bye, Hilary.
Okay. Bye. Hilary, bye. Right. So,
Chair, I think Councillor Foster wanted to speak there as well. So,
yeah, it's all right, Steve. I thought we got an extra vacancy. I thought we got an extra space. Has it not been allocated yet?
not formally, but there is a vacancy for the Labour group. So, if you wanted to appoint Hilary, that's no problem.
Does it take effect from tonight or next meeting?
Well, the vacancy falls to the Labour group, so as soon as the Labour group advise me, then it will take effect. So,
well, it could have taken effect this evening, but not to worry. I think she's gone.
There are enough people in the meeting, yeah. I think, one way or the other. Yeah, we'll be okay. So I guess there's no substitute members in that case, so we don't need to worry about that. Okay. Are there any declarations of interest under the Members' Code of Conduct?
No.
I'll take that as a no. Item 5, we need to confirm and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of November 2020 as a correct record. If you have anything to say about them being incorrect, please indicate right now. Otherwise, I'll take them as being correct. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
First item on the agenda is the report of the Director of Regeneration and Enterprise on the Combined Authority investment. And are you presenting this, Helen?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, off you go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, the report in front of you, members, is here for information, but also we're seeking your ongoing support for the pipeline of regeneration projects that are underway and developing. So you'll be very aware that there's a very ambitious ongoing regeneration programme in Dudley. About £1 billion worth of investment is in the process of being secured or delivered. Many of these projects are on site, and when you've been around Dudley, you will have seen them. We've got the leisure centre that's well advanced now, the metro, the very light rail National Innovation Centre, work just starting on the Black Country Living Museum, well advanced on the work on the Institute of Technology, which will open this September, and the general stuff around Castle Hill that is continuing at pace. We've also got schemes like Portersfield, which are not yet on site, although they have demolished Cavendish House and they're continuing to progress. The interchange is now hopefully fully funded, and that will start before too long. And over Christmas, we were really pleased to see that we've been awarded the Future High Streets bid for Brierley Hill. And just last Friday, we submitted a £25 million bid to government under the Towns Fund for the University Park in Dudley. But these projects are obviously not the end of the story. As these continue through their development, we are also developing a pipeline of projects that are at conception stage or developing further and still require funding. All of these projects, as you'll know from the ones I've listed, involve many, many partners to make them happen and many agencies. Often the sites are in complicated multiple ownerships, and if any development takes place on any site, it obviously involves site clearance, remediation and other infrastructure to be put in place for these developments to be sustainable and appropriate in the long term. Most regen projects will be funded by a mix of funding sources. It's very rare for a scheme to be funded from just one source. It's actually more the norm for them to come from a number of different sources, including central government grants, the combined authority, the Black Country LEP, sometimes the local authority because we might contribute time or land to a scheme, and there's loans and there's private sector leverage as well. Some of the funding sources from the combined authority come direct, some come via devolved funds to the LEP. And a really good example of this is in your report. I won't go through it in full detail, but the Very Light Rail project shows you that each project is broken down to a number of elements. Those elements are funded from a number of different sources, and sometimes the individual elements are funded from a number of sources. And a project only works when all of this funding comes together. The way of regeneration often is that we have to take a leap of faith and progress in the knowledge that funding is coming, but is not 100% secured. Otherwise, things can't develop at the pace that we need them to for regenerating the economy. So the council has benefited already from a number of key funding schemes from the combined authority, not least the Metro, but it's not just the local authorities that can approach the combined authority for funding. Obviously, developers and private sector partners can develop and approach them directly themselves. And a good example of this is Avonbury, who received funding for the demolition of Cavendish House from the combined authority. And we have a couple of current conversations as a council with the combined authority for funding. So you will probably be aware that the investment board in January approved in principle funding the Portersfield highway package. And they hope to have the legal agreement signed in February and to start on site later in the year. We also have a current application, again approved in principle, for the Brierley Hill Access Link, which is a really critical piece of infrastructure that supports the future High Streets bid and will link Brierley Hill High Street down towards Maryhill and the lower plateaus. We also support private sector partners in their conversations with the combined authority, and we are currently engaged with them having conversations with the combined authority over, for example, the Moor Centre in Brierley Hill and also Collygate developments. And we are developing conversations with them on our emerging pipeline as well. So we start to have conversations with the combined authorities as soon as we know we might have an ask. So what we tend to do is submit to them a briefing note, which they will review and agree if in principle we can then progress to an expression of interest, which then progresses to a more detailed application. Early conversations are underway about Lye and the regeneration work we've got planned for there. We're also having conversations with them about a potential ask to support the Towns Fund bid that went in on Friday. So that bid was for 25 million, but the project could be worth up to 35 or 36. So there's still a gap to be funded, and we're having early conversations with them over that. And then there's also a very successful brownfield land housing programme, which we've been funded in the past through the LEP and Homes England, but we're also now having conversations with the combined authority about future phases of that programme. But it's not without its challenges. One of the issues we face in these funding streams is that land and development value and the costs of the development, given the abnormals that we often experience on our sites, mean that it is a challenge. And Dudley housing schemes do sometimes struggle to meet the intervention rate that the combined authority's single commissioning framework requires, which is approximately £10,000 to £15,000 per unit. It's not unheard of in the Black Country for that intervention rate to be nearer 20,000 per unit, sometimes even pushing 40. So this condition, plus the other conditions of those framework, which include, for example, 20% affordable housing and the need for the homes to be built through modern methods of construction, means that sometimes our projects don't meet those funding criteria. And even when they do, if the project doesn't deliver sufficient output, so value for money by the Combined Authority's determination, then it may not be successful, or we may not get the full ask that we're looking for. And there is, by their own agreement, quite a focus on housing outputs for a lot of their funding streams. And we obviously need outputs that are also jobs. So we're supporting the Combined Authority in building a pipeline of not just housing schemes, but also employment schemes. And that's part of their preparation for bidding for greater brownfield employment land funding, because their funds are now becoming depleted, and a lot of their other devolved housing and land funds are very, very housing focused. So we undertake through Regeneration regular briefings of not just the cabinet member and the shadow cabinet, but also Councillor Angus Lees in his role at the Combined Authority, and also Councillor Kathleen Baton, to ensure that they're fully cited on all of our asks or potential asks, and can therefore be representing Dudley and the asks when they're meeting through the Combined Authority. So that's a brief outline of where we're at with the Regen programme, and hopefully allows you to be cited on some of the challenges we face in trying to make those funding pots fit the schemes that we have. But to give you some reassurance, projects don't progress until we have sufficient surety of funding, and obviously there are a number of funding streams that we can review, and we will apply for all funding streams that are relevant. And it is not unusual for us to have a number of conversations going, because we don't know which ones will be successful and which ones will fail. So we will keep those conversations going until that we know we have a suitable funding stream for any projects. So hopefully that's helpful, Chair, and happy to take any questions that members might have. Okay,
thanks very much, Helen. So we can take questions from members of the committee, and we do have Councillor Lees and Councillor Baton with us. If anyone wants any, I don't know, evidence submitted from the Combined Authority members, then we can do that as well. But first of all, we'll take questions from the committee. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Helen, the report doesn't say an awful lot about the impact of the pandemic, because obviously these projects, many of these projects were agreed before the pandemic. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is, first of all, the level of private sector investment which is necessary for these projects to go ahead, the impact of the pandemic on the private sector, whether that's been factored in. And secondly, in terms of the metro and current transport, passenger usage, if the train network, bus networks, they're down to a fraction of their usual usage at the moment, and that's even with a lockdown that's been less restrictive in terms of what business have been able to do. I mean, more businesses have been able to operate this time round. So, how is that going to impact upon the viability of the project? Are there any issues there that you feel that we should be aware of?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Foster. Through you, Chair, if I can respond. So in terms of the pandemic, in terms of the very short-term impact, all of our regeneration projects remained on site and under construction that were already underway. There was a slight pause on one of them just for them to be able to make their site COVID secure for the team, but they've all continued at pace. So in that respect, in the short term, there hasn't been a detrimental impact on the programme of the investment activity. In the long term, we have not yet to see the full impacts of what the pandemic is, and it is in the back of our minds as a regen team that people will expect different things from their homes. They will use their homes differently, they will use their town centres differently. So obviously we have been involved in some of the work to do with the reopening the high streets. We will be conscious as we move forward of the fact that people will use places in a different way. However, they are still going to need homes and they are still going to need jobs. I think the point that you raise about public transport is a really critical one, and I know from briefings that we've seen from Stuart Everton in his role that the data suggesting that yes, public transport use plummeted, particularly rail at the moment, and it is in fact lower, like you say, than it was in March. But we are anticipating that over time some people will return back to their workplaces, even if not to the scale that they did before, and even if not every day of the week. The early indications are that people will start to return because people want that contact and stuff. So we are assuming that it will come back. I think over time we may see differences in the use of some of the buildings in the town centre, and there may be a role for the regeneration team to assist in some repurposing. I think the really critical thing for our town centres is that we drive up residential numbers there, so that we have a population that supports some of those businesses, so they're not entirely reliant on either the tourist economy or on office people to use them. And it's a combination of things that we're going to have to make sure we get right in terms of our centres and where people live, so that we're not overly reliant on any one particular sort of stream of activity.
And if I can just ask a follow-up question, please. Yeah, that's helpful. Obviously, there's a lot of consideration to be given, lots of variables that we can't predict. The university as well, that's would become an important feature of the town, and the bid is 25 million. But my understanding is there's still a shortfall estimated to be about 11 million. Do you know how that gap's likely to be filled?
Yep, so you're absolutely right. The estimated shortfall is circa 11. It's probably nearer 10 because the figure includes the accelerator fund that we've had already, which is £1 million that's going into public realm around the site. That figure at the moment, I think it's fair to say, is a worst case scenario that we believe. So we've yet to do some due diligence on costs. We also need to look at the way we bring the deal forward. So sometimes there's ways of structuring who does which element and which party may be able to, for example, not be liable for VAT, which sometimes can bring overall build cost down. So there's lots of work and due diligence we need to do that might bring that figure and that gap down. But whatever that gap is that's left, that's the conversation that we have started to have with the combined authority about how they might be able to support the project in funding that gap. There's also a number of partners here, so this isn't entirely a council scheme. We've also got Dudley College, we have the University of Worcester, and there is also the potential to lever private sector investment. So if you take the example next door of Very Light Rail, which is comparable, some of the kit in there has been sponsored by industry. So there's a number of different ways that we can bring that gap down or find alternative funding streams. So it won't necessarily come from one place. It could be a combination of points. I accept your point about questions over the capability of private sector to maybe lever funds, given where we are with the pandemic. But we're, some of the people that have contributed to Very Light Rail are very big industry names, so we would hope that they would continue to be able to do it. And in fact, it's like sponsorship, advertising, it's it's an investment for them in the future as well. So hopefully with the University Park offer, because it delivers such a critical sector in terms of health, given where we're at, we need it more than ever, then I would hope that those industries will be resilient enough to be able to also contribute. But we will look at all possible funding resources, and we will spread the risk for all partners by making sure there are a number of sources.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Waltho, you have a question?
Yes, thanks. Thanks very much indeed, Chair. Yeah, 2 or 3 questions and observations, I think, on the report. Firstly, and I've said this before, I've been around a bit of a long time now, and I hate kind of jargon. I'm an ex-factory worker, and really just I see you smiling, Helen. You pointed out about this intervention rate for single commissioning framework funds. Well, you might as well speak Swahili to me, I'm afraid. I have no idea what that means. All that does tell me, or reading the rest of the paragraph, is it kind of smacks of developers ensuring that their profit margins are met rather than social housing need at the end of the day. But that's just a question as to ask what that actually means. Question 2, really, and this again is not quite in the area that I represent or live in, but I have lived around Brierley Hill for most of my time in the borough, and really I just hope that something does come of this funding to improve Brierley Hill High Street, because it's always looked the same to me. It's a kind of sad, really run down place, and I do hope that that will also benefit local people in terms of skills and employment and that sort of thing as well, because we don't, it's very, very rare that we see statistics on this? How will it kind of benefit? Will local people manage to get jobs out of this or whatever? But my biggest point, and number 3, does concern my area. And I've been to so many meetings over the years on the kind of Portersfield area, if you like. In fact, a couple of years ago, we had some wonderful, very glossy A3 drawn up plans given to us by Avonbury at a meeting that involved Alan Lunt and Jim Cunningham at that time. And we saw shops, leisure facilities, loads of real good stuff there. We now noticed that it's gone desperately quiet. At a briefing that we asked for a few weeks ago, there were questions that really couldn't be answered anymore on what Avonbury were actually doing at the moment after all this length of time. So we'd just like to know, as local ward councillors, what is actually being proposed now, because all we've heard on the grapevine is that it's going back to residential, and we all know that residential is more profitable than putting in community facilities, I suppose. So we're very, very concerned about that. And linked to that, and I've only heard again this mooted, that there is something called the St Thomas's Quarter, WMCA, and I presume that's the West Midlands Combined Authority scheme again. We know nothing about that, nothing at all. We've not been spoken to that about that by officers or anything. We'd just like to know what it is and whether we're going to get a joined up approach to the Portersfield development. St Thomas's, it's the same area. And once again, one of the most deprived areas in the borough. It's okay to have all these wonderful investment headlines, but how will they statistically benefit people in St Thomas's with some of the biggest deprivation indices in the borough? How will it benefit human beings in terms of skills, employment, health and well-being in our area? We don't often see that, and I know that's a very difficult subject to quantify, but it would be very helpful if we could get some kind of positive news for people in an area that is desperately run down and struggling. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Helen, do you want to?
Okay, yes, please. Thank you. Okay, so your first point, apologies for the jargon, totally accept that. What was meant by intervention rate for the single commissioning framework is basically for the funding that the Combined Authority has, how much money they on average will give you per housing unit that you deliver. So on average, they will look to give £10,000 to £15,000 per house that the scheme delivers. In terms of Briley Hill, absolutely agree with you. Sincerely hope that we can make this fly and make this happen sooner than later. A number of conversations are underway. I have every faith that you will start to see some changes sooner rather than later. Small scale to begin with, because some of the projects are quite bold and ambitious, but we have not just the regen build projects that are proposed. There's also, with the Heritage Action Zone, a cultural programme and also a community programme. So the team working very closely with the Briley Hill Regeneration and Community Forum, who are going to help us work with the community to deliver some of those work streams, and they're really keen to get started. So I think you'll start to see activity quite soon. We're also working through officers and the community, the governance for the Briley Hill Future High Streets bid, which we're going to mirror what we're doing with the Towns Fund Board. So the local MP will be involved, we'll be inviting local ward members to be involved, members of the community. It was also an area that we considered through the People's Panel, and we still have people from that process who are interested in being involved and working with us on that. So there's a whole piece of infrastructure to make the project work and be governed properly that is being developed at the moment, and then hopefully we'll start to see things happen on the ground. The comment you made about, in effect, inclusive growth, making sure that local people benefit from this investment is absolutely critical. And we are trying to work with the Combined Authority and as an authority to make sure that all of these fantastic opportunities and all of this brilliant investment is not lost in terms of the opportunities that it represents for local people. We are very aware that some of our residents are living in some of the most deprived wards, and some of those people are the furthest from the workplace of our residents. We know that for them to benefit from, say, the opportunities that the metro will bring, and the jobs that it will bring, they are some instances maybe 2 years away from the workplace. So we are working through our adult education team and our skills team to help them through the Black Country Impact Project if you're a younger person, but also through our adult education schemes to support local people to be in a position to be able to access those opportunities when they come up. Now, the economic strategy is twofold. It's to also to get higher paid jobs into the borough. But in doing so, we have to make sure that that gap does not widen. So there's parallel pieces of work through the skills team and through Dudley Business first to make sure that people are brought along that journey with us and have opportunity to access the jobs that will come with it. In terms of Portersfield, there are a lot of ongoing conversations with Avonbury over what will come forward on that scheme. So they're very active conversations and all parties are working very hard to make something happen. The world has moved on since the original planning permission was resolved. Or actually, the second planning permission was resolved. And yes, you're right. It is likely that the scheme that comes forward will probably include more residential than the original schemes we're envisaging. That's a product of where we are in the economics. But we are working with them to also deliver student accommodation, which will support the university park. And we're also in discussions over some kind of community leisure facility, but that we're working through what those might be at the moment. So yes, it appears that perhaps things have gone quiet, but I can assure you they haven't. We're having a lot of conversations. There's just no firm decisions to be able to go public with, or no planning application that's being submitted at the moment, but we are working very hard to make those things come forward. In terms of St Thomas's Quarter and the Combined Authority, we have worked with the Combined Authority to develop what they call an investment plan for St Thomas's Quarter, but in effect, it is now part of the wider Towns Fund bid. The long-term strategy for the town centre is that we will try to refocus the retail core in the high street and in effect shrink it to a much smaller but much more sustainable area and shift the focus of the town centre down towards Castle Hill and the attractions and where the new interchange and the portersfield development will be. That means St Thomas's Quarter, so by which we mean the top end of the high street that's not pedestrianised up to the St Thomas's Church, will become repurposed. So that will mean an increase in residential and changing the use of some of those retail units to leisure facilities, food or beverage or residential. So we will be working with local communities to support repurposing that. And then, of course, there will obviously be engagement with local communities and councillors. But we don't own much land at that end of the town centre, so it will be a partnership approach and having to bring people along with us. But it is part of the wider vision for how we see the town centre moving forward. And I think certainly going back to Councillor Foster's comment, the pandemic will do nothing but I think accelerate that need to focus a retail core in a much smaller but much more sustainable fashion. Hopefully I've covered all your points, Councillor Walther.
Do you want to come back, Steve?
No, thanks for that explanation, Helen. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Steve and Helen. I know it's Councillor Lees. I see you've got your hand up. You want to make a contribution, presumably.
Yes, please, Chair. It was really coming back to Councillor Foster's comments on the pandemic, and just in support of what Helen said. I sit on the Housing and Land Board and the Strategic Economic Development Board. And the Strategic Economic Development Board looks at what is happening in the world, covering all different sectors, education, manufacturing, housing, etc., and looks at trying predicting the impacts that the pandemic will have. And there's a lot of work being done on how we can prepare and reskill people for emerging economies, like the very light railway, for example, in order to, looking further forward, make sure we have got a plan and we have got people who can fulfill those jobs. And that also includes the education world, where, are we educating the right skills for the right people for the right jobs to increase employment? So there's a lot going on the housing front. Then there is an affordable housing delivery vehicle being set up by the Combined Authority to look at affordable housing and work with housing associations and local authorities. There's about £450 million have been assured, not secured, I don't think, at the moment, from the government to go into that across the combined authority. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and in support of Helen's explanation of funding, it is disparate, it is piecemeal, and I think Councillor Baton will probably support me on this, on the overview of Scrutiny Committee of the Combined Authority, which I sit on with Councillor Baton. We have recently undertaken, and we are coming to the fruition of doing a Black Country review, because the members, our colleagues in Wolverhampton, Sandwell, Walsall, and obviously in Dudley, we don't feel in the past we've had a fair deal on funding. So we're interviewing people, finding out, and Helen was one of the people who contributed to the various sessions, and then that paper will be written up as to the Black Country is different from Birmingham. 85% of our population not only live in the Black Country, they work in the Black Country, unlike Birmingham and Solihull, where they have a lot more commuters coming in. People walk to work. So we are different, and we're trying to make that point and make sure our job working in the Combined Authority is to spot opportunities to lobby for funding to come into Dudley. So believe you me, there is a lot of activity going on, and I from what I see going on, the pandemic will impact us. We have a huge number of people furloughed across the Combined Authority. Not all of those people will get jobs if they're made redundant, but there's a lot of work going on to prepare now urgently to make sure we recover. The Combined Authority, just lastly, in the last few previous years, has had the fastest growing economy outside of London. Obviously, we have been hit hard by the pandemic, but you know, there's a lot being done to make sure we come out of it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Lees. Just a note on that then. So there is the Combined Authority are undertaking a Black Country review, and there'll be a report into that.
Well, what's happening is the Black Country is supported by the Black Country LEP, and then Birmingham and Solihull have got their own LEP, and Warwick and etc. got their own. So the LEP is one of the funding sources, but they bid, or they're given money from the Combined Authority, which they then have to allocate to us. One of the problems is that a project will be measured on outputs, or GVA, gross value add, which is a combination of production numbers, income and expenditure, but there is no accounting for social benefits and things like that. Okay. So we're trying to put forward a report. It's undertaken by a subcommittee from the Combined Authority Overview and Scrutiny Committee, whose role is to scrutinise the mayoral policy making and budget making. So obviously this comes under that. To go before ultimately the board, probably March onwards, for them to acknowledge there are differences that need to be made, and for the officers in the Combined Authority to hopefully make changes which will benefit the Black Country further. So I hope that you understand that explanation.
Yeah, it's fine. It just sounds as though there's some work going on, which I think Dudley could benefit from having you and Kathy come back at Councillor Baton, come back at some point and present the Dudley part of that report to an appropriate committee.
Yeah, I mean, more than happy to. And I think the other thing to say is that we get a lot of support from Walsall and Wolverhampton, because all the things that we're doing are interdependent on what they're doing and vice versa. So it's no good having a metro unless it's going somewhere, and Brierley Hill has been regenerated, so people want to go to Brierley Hill. So it's interdependent between the four Mets in the Black Country. So yeah, we'd be quite happy to do that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lees. Councillor Baton, you want to make a contribution?
Thank you, Chair. Really, it was just to talk a little bit. Angus has spoken quite a lot about the Black Country review that we've undertaken, but I think it's really important to set the context around that. So Councillor Lees alluded to the fact that 82% or 85% of those that live in the Black Country also work within the Black Country. We've seen that the Black Country has some of the lowest levels of job density in the country, and also the level of professional and managerial jobs. The share of those is much smaller in the Black Country than it is elsewhere. So what we've done part of the review. So we've had presentations from Helen on a regeneration front. We've had the LEP come and give us a presentation. We also had a very interesting scene setting arrangement from Peter Kenway of the Barrow Cadbury Trust, and a couple of other people. We've got to go back and do some more around the skills agenda, because what really came loud and clear to us was around the skills of people in the Black Country, and how we go into upskill, reskill, and give people the opportunity to really, fight their own corner within the jobs market as we move forwards. And I think one of the recommendations, particularly around the LEP, will be to look at where their focus has been. Now, the LEP, obviously, it deals with a lot of large amounts of public money, but I think from the LEP's point of view, a lot of that money a lot of their attention is focused around heavy industry. Now, is that still the case for Dudley and the Black Country? Are things changing, and the way businesses are being developed? We've also seen that unemployment figures have risen, as you would expect, given where we are, quite considerably. So I think that the count and I haven't seen figures since October, but the count figures for Dudley were in excess of 14,000 claimants. So there's a real job of work to do in terms of understanding the current situation, understanding the skills that are going to be needed going forward, and how the work is going to be offered to those people to get them reskilled and upskilled and move them back into the jobs market as quickly as is possible. And I think, I don't think any of us would feel that we absolutely need a cohesive approach to be able to do that from all quarters. But I think absolutely, as I said, we've got one set of questions left to do next week. And then I think once the report's gone to the CA, I think Angus and I would be absolutely, really pleased to come back, because it is an ABCA approach. And I think Dudley are obviously a key player within that. So more than happy, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Baton. I'll come back to the recommendations at the end of the meeting then, I think, and that could be one of them. I'll move on now. I see Councillor Tyler's got his hand up. Off you go, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just very quickly on a recommendation. I think we'd be missing a trick if we didn't make a recommendation to bring that Dudley section of that Black Country report back to a scrutiny committee within Dudley, primarily because it gets it on the Dudley Council's website and in the psyche of the Dudley Council, Dudley residents, where we can have an input and they can question what we do on their behalf as local councillors. So I would agree with that, and perhaps someone can work out some wording for how to bring that back. Just going back to the earliest part of the report, and that Helen did, and also that Councillor Waltho added. The intervention rate of 10 to 15 from the combined authority, Helen, I was okay with that until you said that it could go up 25 to 40, when the actual rate could hit that. So I presume the shortfall would be met by someone else. And then, of course, there's always the affordable housing percentage that's required in any development where there's a large number of properties. Originally, the Portersfield project was due to create 500 jobs, and it was going to cost £82 million. The world has changed dramatically, and will change even more before we're out of COVID. I would be reassured, first of all, if I knew who Avonbury were, because I have no idea who they are and how they sit in the business community, what their actual role is, or whether I know we've got a memorandum of understanding with them, which was signed in, was it June or July? But it'd be nice to know if Avonbury ever came to the point where they could no longer see this as profitable. I know it's a business decision and it's secret, but if they ever reach that point, we need to know that point sooner rather than later, because something has to be done with the Churchill, the Cavendish House and portersfield site. I don't just want to see it turn into a housing estate, because it was supposed to bring jobs and footfall into the town centre. So that's all I've got to add. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Tyler. Do you have anything to say in reply, Helen?
Just very briefly, Councillor, sorry, you're absolutely right. If the economics of the scheme requires more per unit than the intervention rate that the Combined Authority likes to apply, then that funding has to be found from somewhere else. So if there are abnormal costs because of the conditions of the ground, that's part of the total project cost, and it will have to be found through other funding sources, which is just another complication of trying to get schemes out of the ground. The affordable housing requirement, so the funding stream that the Combined Authority have requires 20%. Actually, as a black country, our policy requirement is 25% if you're over a certain number of units. So in that respect, it's not an unreasonable ask. However, you will be aware from any schemes that have probably happened in your area, or if you've been involved in Development Control Committee, it often is a lower percentage if there are abnormal costs in the site, because it is one of the things that sometimes gets reduced in order to tip a scheme into viability. But it's something we obviously have to audit, and only happens when that's an absolute requirement, and only happens to the degree that is required to make that happen. In terms of your comment about Portersfield, yes, it was originally proposing more jobs. Yes, now it's probably going to have an increasing amount of residential to it, because the world has moved on from the original scheme. People are using town centres differently. They are using their food supermarkets differently, and therefore the scheme is likely, whenever it is absolutely nailed down, to look a little bit different to how it did before. We have the memorandum of understanding. As this scheme progresses, it will have to come back through Cabinet, and that will be formalised into a legally binding agreement onto whatever is the final deal that we come to as a council with them to deliver that. And yes, I understand your point about needing it to be sooner than later, because it is a really critical site for us. It's potentially the best town centre regeneration site that we have at the moment, given its location next to the interchange that's being redeveloped, and with the metro coming in. So absolutely the time is now for that site, and we will be working as a council and as officers as hard as we can to make sure that that site comes forward in the most appropriate way. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Tyler, is that answer your questions?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Crumpton.
Thank you, Chair. Helen, the regeneration aspects, and to be a bit parochial, Lye and Cradley. And I bring up Cradley because we had a few years ago a regeneration project that went on that sort of excited local people, and then it died to death. Then we got a very, very small, in the scheme of things, regeneration project around the windmill, bottom of Windmill Hill and the Colligate area, which locally we think needs to look at again, but has taken ages, has taken years, and still is not resolved. We're then talking in this paper about the regeneration of Lye, and I think for me it's about realities and the timescales that we'd want to look at the regeneration of Lye in, as well as the regeneration of Cradley. But Lye is a much bigger project. We've got a huge amount of slums around there, not least the council owned flats and around Claycroft Place. And if you go round there, if people haven't been round there, it's really quite awful. And then you look at the Valley Road area and around there, a lot of very old buildings where we've ploughed money over donkey's years into grants to make some of those premises a little bit more habitable for people. And the thing that strikes me is we've got enormous social problems in that area. And it's how do we take the people that live there now with us? How do we involve them in a potential regeneration project that is probably going to take a decade to come to fruition? Because it seems to me that's not an unreasonable timescale to at least be able to start to put things in. And then you look at Briley Hill and everybody's sort of really happy that we got, is it 25 million quid to go in there? But I lived there until three or 4 months ago. And I don't think 25 million quid is even going to touch the fabric of the Briley Hill High Street area, unless we can get massive private investment in there. And those two areas, Briley Hill and Lye, do have a problem. I know that the Wednesbury Metro is going to get there, although I've got my own feelings about that and wondering why anybody would want to go to Wednesbury. But, you know, we don't have that sellable aspect with a Lye project. And it seems to me that what we'd be looking at there, realistically, is a massive housing project. You know, around the high street and redeveloping the high street around there, and then having to look at the traffic aspect coming back through Lye. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that how do we get people involved? How do we not raise unrealistic expectations? How do we assess the level of funding and what model we're going to be using there? Because I just think it's at the moment, if we just went out to people and said, oh, we're looking at regenerating Lye, I think we've got nothing to go out there with at the moment. So I'd be interested in your comments around there.
Okay, thank you, Chair. If I can respond to those points. So, yes, I understand where you come from, Councillor Crumpton. Lye in particular, it is a long-term project. So this is when I talked earlier about the emerging pipeline, because things take some while to come through inception and development before you even get to the point of applying for funding and building it. Lye is at the beginning of that journey. So we see Lye as having huge potential off the back of the fact that actually it's on a railway line, it's got very good connections, there's a good transport node there, that if it's invested in and built upon, you have the ability to create quite a change, I think, there. But you're absolutely right. We're talking about years. We're talking about probably a decade to be able to get to that point. There's some land assembly we have to put together, but we are in conversations with a number of key landowners there who are open to conversations. There will be some uses that we will have to work with them to maybe relocate them. If we can't relocate them or they don't wish to relocate, then we might be designing and developing around some of these things. So all of these issues have to be played through before we can actually get to the point of knowing what development might go where. And we're at a very early stage of starting to talk about excuse me, developing master plans for that area. So the reason that is critical is, and this is where the community involvement comes in, this is not about individual investment opportunities and individual buildings being built or individual housing areas being built. That just creates a development plot and a development. This is about placemaking and creating good, sustainable, livable places that people want to come and live in or want to come and work in. That's not just about the buildings, that's about the spaces in between the buildings, the way people move between them, how they get to and from work and how they use their leisure time. So Lye has a number of opportunities with the green and the blue infrastructure, so the waterways and some of the green opportunities. And it is actually listed in the Black Country through the LEP have a garden cities project or garden towns project, and Lye is our potential for developing in a new inclusive way that maximises those opportunities for the natural environment. And to do that, we need to work with communities, as you rightly say, from the bottom up. So the idea with Lye, and this is another reason why it will take quite some time, is we don't want to go and impose a development plan on the local community. We want to work with the local community for them to work with us on what they want to see and how they want to use their local area. And noting your absolutely valid point, there are a number of different communities there, and there have been community cohesion issues and some antisocial behaviour issues. We need to try and work together to bring those communities together to develop a place they want to be in. So I've already had some very initial conversations with Karen Wright, the new Director of Public Health, about how we might work together on bringing those communities together to develop those plans. So very early days, yes, it's absolutely a lot of work and it will take time, but we want to build on the really positive work that happened in Brierley Hill and Dudley on the People's Panel and roll out, in effect, a similar sort of model for Lye, so that we're working with the communities to develop places that they want to see and that they will use. So yes, I absolutely agree with you. Communities need to underpin, own and help us develop all of these plans and programmes as we move forward. Very briefly, Collegate's work and conversations are still ongoing on there. So yes, it has taken a huge amount of time, complicated land ownerships, but we do have a developer who is trying to pull together a scheme and bring that forward, and we'll continue to support them and work with them on that. Brierley Hill, the grant offer that we've been given was 9.98 million. But if all of the development proposed in that programme comes forward, it could lever over 100 million. And we are having conversations with some of the private sector owners on how we might support them with bids and bring forward development on their areas. So yes, you're absolutely right. 10 million, even 25 million is a drop in the ocean of what that entire programme will need. But it's what will start us off and help us get a conversation about leverage and get people improving. And then hopefully you reach a point where enough intervention has happened and enough improvement has happened that the market improves and then the private sector takes over. So yes, you're right. It is a challenge, but I do think it's one that is deliverable. Thank you.
Chair, if I can just
yes.
just to come back on this, I think the community engagement is absolutely essential. We have a very difficult community to deal with around the Lye area. And not just because of the different nationalities involved around there. It's sort of gone backwards. We moved forward a little a couple of years ago, but we've gone back again now. COVID hasn't helped in any way at all around there. The sort of inroads we made into those communities have not stopped, but been pushed back a lot. And I think that what strikes me, having lived in the area and known the area for a very, very long time, is the number of people that own parcels of land there and the difficulties that that's going to cause in the future. We have a number of quite large landowners around there who've made massive investments over many years, who are canny as well. They know what they're doing with money. And I think that that's one of the obstacles that we do face. And at the moment, there's no visible discussion taking place. So your idea of moving something along in terms of the Brierley Hill township concept, I think it would be useful. We're not going to be able to do it while COVID's around, because you need people to be able to meet face to face to do those sorts of things. Yeah. But I think if you do, then I know that I'm very willing to get involved down there. I was born there, for goodness sake. It's part of my family. But the use of the councillors in these things is deeply important, and it's not just the three councillors that cover Lye High Streets. It's also in Cradley and Williscoe. It's the Pedmore councillors up the road. It's the Quarry Bank councillors. We all sort of link around that community. So I think when we come to do it, it would be really useful, although it is not going to happen tomorrow. It would be really useful to sit down as a group to decide how we can be used properly and our contacts in the community be used properly for that. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Do you have any more to add there, Helen?
No, other than to welcome the supporter members to become involved. That's excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. How confident are we that the portersfield and the interchange will actually be achieved?
Through you, Chair, the interchange is now hopefully fully funded. It did have a funding gap, but there have been some opportunities to use different funds for other projects, which will free up the ability for the interchange to become fully funded, and that's just going through the various different governance proposals. So hopefully that is a definite now, and it will be able to reprogram and start on site before too long. Portersfield is one of the best opportunity sites that we have in Dudley Town Centre, so I have every confidence that we will bring forward a scheme on that site, obviously working in partnership, but it's got so much going for it in such a great location that a scheme will come forward. We just need to work through the details.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Foster, you have another question.
I do, Chair. It relates to just a follow-up question from following the response that Helen gave Councillor Crumpton relating to consultation and, you know, not imposing development and engaging with members of the community about developments and ensuring that they're fully involved in shaping those plans. I totally support Councillor Crumpton in saying ideally this will be an activity done face to face. Obviously consultation is far better and far more productive when you can build up that rapport between the council and residents. However, I don't think anytime soon we're going to be in a position where we can do that type of consultation in any sizable numbers. And I just want, having already raised at a previous meeting that I'm sure Helen can recall, when we talked about consultation and the council's own consultation policy, we are going to have to look at ways of innovative ways of encouraging people online or through social media or through other formats of engaging them, so that nothing's on hold for the want of having a proper platform or a suitable platform to engage.
Thank you. Chair, if I could just quickly respond on that, I'd absolutely support that comment, Councillor Foster, that if we don't know how long the current situation may last, we don't want to necessarily pause everything until we have the restrictions released, but also accepting that if you can do face-to-face, then that's much, much better. But to just give you an example, we've just last year in November did a consultation on the Towns Fund bid, the first of a number of consultations that we will hold, but we held it on the Castle Hill Vision, went out to consultation on the university building, the public realm and the proposed investment at the castle and zoo. And that had to all be done virtually. So we had an online survey. We had over 950 responses, which was really, really positive. And we also held a number of virtual presentations where between the Regen team, we attended, we presented, and we were able to feed a Q&A session at the end. So yes, it's not ideal. It's a lot easier to be able to sit around a table and often with plans and papers and post-it notes and felt tip pens. But we do have the ability to keep the conversation going until we can get back to that relative normality. And I have to say that with the help of CAPA, that engagement event that took place in November was hugely successful, and we got more responses than we probably normally get. So I think one of the opportunities that's arisen out of the pandemic is it's forced us to use new and different means. And as we move forward, I think it'd be a case of continuing with the best of what we've had to introduce because it's worked, but also complementing it with the more traditional face-to-face.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Millwood.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the report. I welcome the investment that's going into Dudley at a time that, you know, this is unprecedented. We've never, ever suffered a pandemic like this in my lifetime and in most people's lifetime. We have had 7 leaders of our authority since the Cavendish House debacle actually started. Regeneration takes a long, long time. Funding can take a long, long time. There have been so many leaders across the Black Country involved with the LEP over time, and I was one of them. A lot of these projects were started many years ago. They're now coming to fruition. This is something to be celebrated for our borough. Too long have we and the rest of the Black Country stagnated, so we are getting there. And I welcome every single piece of investment in the borough. Whatever your beliefs, whatever your politics, everything that is going on is going to be done for the good of not just us, but for people in the future, for future generations. It doesn't happen overnight. It probably won't benefit me. It will benefit my children and my grandchildren, if God forbid I have any. The one thing I would like to ask though, Helen, you did mention earlier about allocation of funds hinge on jobs and skills. And I'd like to know how we square the circle, so to speak, when we do give up a lot of industrial land or previous industrial and employment land to housing. I want to make sure that in Dudley, we haven't got to go out of our borough to work, that we can work in borough and encourage our greener technologies. And really, my question is how do we square that circle, making sure we have the right balance, not too much density in housing when we do actually need employment land as well. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ward. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's a very difficult balance. So to get regeneration funding, you have to be able to demonstrate outputs, which are either housing units or jobs. There are a couple of others around skills and learners, but generally it's houses and jobs that they count. And it is a difficult balance because you absolutely need both. Everybody needs a good quality, affordable home to live in, but people also need places to work. And as Councillor Elise and Councillor Baton pointed out, many of our workforce are also our residents, and a lot of them not only live and work in the borough, they walk to work and they live virtually within sight of their places of work. So that balance is ever critical in the Black Country. As it happens, as we're doing the Black Country Plan review, we've gone out and done a lot of evidence base for economic stuff and for housing numbers as well. And what we have found through this evidence is sites that were either allocated in the first plan for employment or which we thought would move towards housing and therefore had been allocated as a housing site in the previous plan, or years ago we would have thought in this iteration of the plan would, are actually staying as employment. So the overwhelming evidence that's coming forward is some of those employment sites that we thought there was no demand for, there absolutely is, and so they will stay as employment. But that flip gives us another sort of headache in as much as we now have to find housing land. So it is a difficult balance. So do everything we can to make sure we get all the housing land and all the employment land within the Black Country. So that's obviously, it's not just within Dudley, it's within the Black Country. So we look at the numbers holistically. We are under what they call the duty to cooperate, having conversations with neighbouring authorities. If we can't meet that need, of how much that need they will provide in the neighbouring authorities. But the first thing we have to do is do everything we can to provide for ourselves first. Obviously, residents don't know boundaries in the way that we do. They travel across boundaries to work and they come into the borough to work. So there is a travel to work pattern that we have to look at. And that's the catchment area that we'll be seeking to make sure that we've got those jobs in. Dudley first, Black Country if we can't do it within Dudley. And then if that can't happen, then we do talk to our neighbours. But yes, it's a constant tension between making sure we've got enough land for employment and homes for our residents.
Well, that's really good, Helen. If I may, Chair, if I could just ask a supplementary.
Yeah.
Where I represent Gornal Ward, we're right on the edge of South Staffs, and as you're probably aware, there's a lot of there's a study going on in South Staffs. I think that's ended. They're going to publish a report later on in the year. There's a lot of work being carried out right on the board, actually in our ward, but it's being carried out by South Staffs with regards to building right on the green belt. And this is something that my residents are fighting a long battle with. And I just need, I mean, I know you can't give me that reassurance because it's not our authority, but we do need to protect our green belt as well, not just up in the north, but obviously around Stourbridge and the Hales Owen as well. So that's just a consideration that we need to, you know, sort of take back to the West Midlands Combined Authority that yes, we do need the housing, but at what cost? And that will be something I will be fighting against, i.e. building on the green belt. Well, thank you for that, Helen.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. I see that Councillor Harley has his hand up. You wish to make a contribution?
Yeah, just a small contribution if I can, Chair. Touching on what Councillor Millward just mentioned about, you know, Cavendish House finally coming down. Thank goodness it has. And a few other members have sort of commented on the state where we are with COVID and the after effects of the pandemic. But Councillor Millward hit it right on the button. A lot of these projects, whatever region project you have, take a long time to actually deliver the end product. From when we have an idea, when members talk about it in the members, you know, coffee room, where it goes to cabinet meetings, where we actually go back and try and get the funding to actually building the damn thing, it can be years. So just to allay people's fears, I wouldn't get too hung up on where we are now with the effects of COVID, i.e. numbers on public transport, etc., office accommodation, people working from home. We'll be in a very different world in 3 or 4 years' time, where a lot of these projects are built and have been fully constructed. But I think what is important to state is that those councils that show ambition and really do have regeneration at the heart of everything that they believe in, those councils will be trailblazers. And we intend this authority to be an absolute trailblazer as we come out of the effects of the pandemic. You know, we've got to invest in regeneration. And if we do that, will create the jobs and the housing and the prosperity that the borough needs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harley. Helen, I have a few questions of my own, if you wouldn't mind. First, specifically about the report, I notice in paragraph 3, you do mention that securing funds is something that's progressing in terms of the interchange. And that's a general theme, of course, that all of these projects are interconnected. They're interconnected, or they're interdependent, should I say, in many ways. Some of them obviously very physically, that you want to arrive at a place where you build some homes, etc. So specifically, have we actually secured funds for the interchange? No, I'm sure that we will. Even if we haven't, I'm sure that we will. But obviously, there are projects dependent upon that interchange happening, and there's bound to be a knock-on effect. So I'm interested in what risk that exposes us to, and particularly, does it create any sort of additional financial risk? So besides that, another question. Again, we have all the projects. There are many projects in here. There are some projects that you've said that, well, there are other projects besides this. What I feel that is lacking, I'm not sure if it's just lacking, full stop, or whether we're lacking reference to it. But where is the plan that connects all of these projects together and gives us Dudley's, regeneration vision, so that we, when we're planning what we're going to do at Portersfield, what does that link into? How does it create jobs, create homes? How, why are we building transport from one place to another? How does that work? I feel that that's missing. In terms of transparency, I think for Dudley residents in the future, certainly all of these projects have benefits in terms of outcomes, and I know we've talked about, all of the people have asked this question, but really specifically, how do we measure and monitor these projects in terms of their outcomes, so that when a Dudley resident says to us, I like that project, but what did it do for me? You've got, we have an answer for them. I note as well, just one other thing that we haven't really talked about in terms of all these projects. We have talked about COVID, of course, and the changes that has thrust upon us, whether we liked it or not. But I also feel very much that the issue of climate change and the work that the Climate Change Working Group are currently doing would also begin to thrust other issues upon all of the decisions we're making in these projects. And I'm just curious to know how we're going to incorporate that into how we proceed in the future. I better stop asking questions, otherwise we'll be here all night. So I'll let you go.
Okay, I think I've captured them all, but if at the end I haven't, please do come back. So the first point you raised was to do with the interchange and the fact that all of the projects are in theory discrete projects. They exist in their own right as a project, but you're absolutely right. They only really matter when they all come together in terms of the critical mass that they create. So the metro will come into the new interchange. The interchange will serve Portersfield, the town centre, etc. So yes, they're absolutely intrinsically linked. And that's what's going to bring that catalyst of considerable regeneration change. It's a number of projects coming together at the same time. The project is funded. It's going through the last bits of approvals for the last part of funding, but the agreement in principle is there for all of the funding. So that project is over the line in that respect. It isn't a risk to us in as much as it's not our project. It's a Transport for West Midlands project, so it's not for us to find the funds, although the council has contributed. We've contributed in terms of land on some of the site, and we're obviously supporting it as officers to make that come forward. So in terms of your comment about lacking information about how that all connects in the regen strategy, you're absolutely right. This report is silent on that. But to answer the question, to begin with, there's all the high level plans and strategies. So for us, the critical document in terms of setting that direction of travel for regen is that, to begin with, the Black Country Plan, or the core strategies it's currently called, which sets out how many homes we need, how many jobs we have, what we're going to let our town centres expand by in terms of retail. And so that sets a very high level vision and strategy for how we're going to grow our economy in that respect. That then gets filtered down to lower order plans and strategies. So then you might get, for example, Brierley Hill has an area action plan, Dudley Town Centre has an area action plan. And then below that, we get to the much more granular detail of where we have master plans or regeneration plans for particular areas. So for Dudley Town Centre, if I take that as an example, because there's much more development on site, so it's a bit more advanced, we've had a spatial plan for that, and all of those projects for many years, but it's now come together again through the Towns Fund bid. So the whole of the town centre is now planned, and there is a strategy and a pipeline of development that will bring forward the aim to focus that retail core, increase the visitor economy, and drive up the economy in terms of jobs and opportunities through the Castle Hill investments and those opportunities there. So all of our areas will have or have emerging regeneration visions and strategies. The scale of that and where that sits depends on the scale of the intervention. So your Colligate example is a much more localised project through to a whole Dudley Town Centre or a whole Brierley Hill Town Centre, and there's a number of different options as to how we can respond in terms of plans and strategies depending on the scale of the intervention. Climate change, that's obviously a really critical issue. The single commissioning framework I talked about, which is the funding process by which the combined authority allocates all their funds, one of their conditions and their criteria is that green economy and the climate change agenda. So it runs through a lot of our funding streams. A number of our projects are trying to address some of these issues. So Very Light Rail, for example, has very good green credentials, and a lot of our new buildings are trying to be as carbon neutral as possible. Some of our housing schemes coming forward are, again, as a requirement of combined authority and other funding streams. Modern methods of construction and or trying to have a lot of renewables or be as climate friendly as possible. So yes, it is perhaps not explicit, but it does run through all of our projects and all of our strategies, and I think that will become ever more pertinent and ever more visible as we do progress. Hopefully I've captured everything. That's about.
Almost. Yes, thank you for all those answers. Thank you very much. It was just about the transparency on
yes,
the outcomes.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. One of the problems we have is, as a couple of members have alluded to, is it's very long term, some of these interventions. So some of the outputs you get are very obvious at the beginning. So you've got a home, or you might have created some employment land which has generated new jobs. So those you can measure quite early, and they are measured as part of the funding. We have to demonstrate that so we don't expose the council to clawback. The other measures in terms of what as Joe Public on the street benefits from, obviously there's the obvious investment where there's more activity in a town centre, more money coming into a town centre, and people with jobs that can then obviously contribute to the economy. But a lot of them are quite long term, so they may not be measured in a 5-year period after that intervention has taken place. It might be much more longer term. But what we can do is sometimes model and predict what might happen. So, for example, for the Metro, to get that extension business case over the line, we as a council worked with partners and engaged a firm of consultants to model what the economic impacts of that intervention might actually be and look like. And then over time, we will be able to sort of review, once the Metro is up and running, whether those impacts have been delivered to the scale that we expect them to be. And some things are a lot harder to measure. There's social return on investments, there's health and well-being. You have to monitor and capture these in different ways, and some of them are a bit less tangible. And some of that's about conversations with communities. It's not just things that you can measure or tick a box. Sometimes that's just how people feel about the place they live in, and whether it's a place that they're happy with and feel safe and secure. So I think it's a very long-winded answer to say there's not one size that fits all. There's a number of different things that we have to do, and some of that comes back again to that engagement in communities. What do they want about where they live? What will make them use their town centre, and what makes that look like a success for them? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I can see that much of this needs to or can be measured over a long period of time. So what you're really saying is that we should look to our economic improvements, perceptions about how people feel about living in the borough, and how that's going to change over the the years after a project has been implemented. Thanks for that.
Okay.
I have noticed that Councillor Kettle had his hand up before I start, and that's the last question I'm going to take, and then we're going to move on. Okay. So, Councillor Kettle.
Thank you. The one aspect that comes through witnessing this meeting is the enormous spectrum of activity that is covered by economic activity and regeneration. The level on the streets, as I call it, the impact on the people, the impact on the working environment, the infrastructure. And the one aspect, we had a brilliant meeting this morning that gave us a collective insight to how these things were coming together, and the huge ambition that is being put into Dudley started to show up in the briefing this morning, and I found it quite awesome. And this is only a start in many respects, because it's showing up how isolated we are as a community in the borough, and how our infrastructure is impacting to a huge degree on our economic activity. So it's wonderful to have this opportunity to show more of what's going on, and our officers have worked tremendously behind the scenes, and I've got a lot of respect for our officers, because it isn't only ideas, land, money. Seeing these things through from start to finish is an enormous project that often takes years, as has been discussed. But I tell you what, I'm immensely proud of what's going on in Dudley, and we have a lot to be thankful for. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kettle, and thank you, Helen.
Thank you.
So just to wrap that up then, in terms of recommendations, I think we can note the contents of the report and ongoing work to ensure the pipeline regeneration projects, etc., without doubt. I'd also like to recommend that we have sight of the Black Country Review as and when it's available, and if Councillor Lees and Councillor Baton can help facilitate that, and that it's brought to an appropriate committee, because it may take a while and this committee may not exist by the time it arrives. And I don't know whether this will happen by on its own and happen somewhere else, but I'd very much like to see a review of those overarching policies that all connect together and in the end come down to these projects, so that members can get an idea of where these projects sit in in the direction that Dudley's going. So Helen, maybe I could ask you where, how could that happen? What sort of report would that be, and what committee do you think it might come to?
More than happy, Chair, to come back maybe to this committee, if that's the best way forward. I'll obviously speak to Steve Griffiths and colleagues as to whether there's more appropriate for him. And maybe it's a case of, rather than a report, we do a bit of a presentation. Some of these things are a bit easier visually when you can see how plans and strategies link together. And we could show you some of the spatial plans that we have that show some of these projects, because you often, when it's on a map form, you can see their interrelations and why they're so important. So more than happy to come and do a presentation if that's helpful.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. If I can leave that with Democratic Services to think about then. Right, crikey. Bear with me just a second. In that case, and if everyone's happy, I'd like to move on to item 7 and discuss the medium-term financial strategy. And I think we've got Ian with us to present that. Am I right?
That's correct.
Right,
Chair.
Thank
you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to consult on the draft budget that was approved by Cabinet on the 17th of December. There's been a lot of talk on the last item about the uncertainty created by COVID-19, and that is, as much as anything, an issue in the background of all the work we've been doing on the budget this year. The financial position keeps changing and changing at a faster rate than perhaps we've ever experienced before. And those changes will be reflected in the final version of the report to Cabinet in February and Council in March. The main changes that I would highlight, though, are that the COVID response funding that we are receiving in the short term is continuing to rise. Notably, we expect a further 5.1 million of contain outbreak management funding over and above the sum that's shown in Appendix A of the report. The local government finance settlements come in better than expected, so next year's forecast resources are now 263 million rather than the 259 million shown in paragraph 31. On the adverse side, on the spending side of the equation, we have had to reassess ongoing spending pressures, particularly putting additional money into adult social care and children's services. So the overall financial position is a mixed one, and I say that obviously against the background of the fact that in human terms, COVID has been but nothing but a tragedy and an ongoing tragedy. But just looking at the financial position in the short term, we have received significant funding to support our response to COVID, and as such our reserves are actually better than we would have expected at this point, although relative to the average council they're still relatively low. But looking in the longer term, we're still a low taxing and low spending council. We still show deficits in future years of the medium term financial strategy, and those need to be addressed to be fully financially sustainable. Bringing this report to OSMB is the last stage in the scrutiny process. So it's been through the individual scrutiny committees over the last couple of weeks. I don't want to go into all the detail at this point. Questions have been asked and answered on all of the scrutiny committees, and I won't go over all of that. But in terms of scrutiny resolutions, Children's Services Scrutiny noted the report, subject to requesting some further information around the delivery of home to school transport savings. Corporate Scrutiny and Place Scrutiny Committee also noted the budget assumptions. The most significant perhaps discussion and resolutions around the budget came from the Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny Committee, where they resolved to ask Cabinet to consider a number of concerns and comments. In doing so, they pointed out that the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the integral contribution of adult social care to protecting lives and delivering critical care to the most vulnerable residents of the borough. The Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny Committee noted the sustained failure of government to produce an adult social care green paper and provide a sustainable and safe footing upon which to deliver future care. And the committee asked for a cross-party representation to government to prioritise adult social care as we emerge from the pandemic. The committee expressed concerns about adult social care in Dudley delivering significant budget savings whilst the pandemic continues to affect the community, and asked the Cabinet to reconsider that. And the committee offered its full support to the adult social care workforce for their work throughout the pandemic. So those were the resolutions of health and adult social care. As I say, the other scrutiny committees noted the budget report. That's all I wanted to say at this point, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much, Ian. I don't see any hands up with any further questions, except for Dave Tyler, who's just jumped in there. Councillor Tyler.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Ian, for highlighting the additional recommendations that our committee put forward. I think it's crucial when you see the pressures, the enormous pressures are being placed on adult social care, not just now, but it's been coming for years, to be quite honest, and it'll continue for years after the pandemic has ceased. But it's crucial that we get this green paper from the government. They've promised and promised, and I know Nick Barlow and Cathy Baton have asked on a couple of occasions, but I think we really, as a local authority, should encourage other local authorities as well to put the pressure on successive governments to give us a fair funding for adult social care. A lot of people were frightened, are frightened now sometimes to go into care homes, and there's going to be added pressures now for people to look after their elderly at home, and that's going to put even more strain on the adult care system. So I would urge the Cabinet to reconsider some of the swinging cuts that adult social care has been asked to make during this round of cuts. It is important. It's crucially important. If we can't look after our children and the elderly, then I don't know what we're doing in this position. So that's all I've got to say. And I was going to raise it later on, but I'm glad Ian's raised it now, and I'm happy to chip in and make a plea. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Tyler. Ian, do you have anything to respond?
I think it's only a partial response to the point that's made, but just to re-emphasise, the report that's in front of the Overview Scrutiny Management Board tonight reflects the draft budget that was approved by Cabinet on the 17th of December. The report that will actually be going to Cabinet, which we're just in the process of finalising, will put an additional 3.1 million a year of ongoing funding in adult social care over and above the funding that's actually shown in this report. Due to timing this year, we've had to take those decisions or work on those figures in parallel with the scrutiny committees.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Councillor Foster.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a comment that notwithstanding the additional amount that Ian Newman has stated would be on top of the would come through for adult health and adult social care, it's still I think it's still a smallish amount compared to the considerable increase in demand I think that there will be for services. For example, we have yet to understand how long COVID is going to impact on people, how debilitating that will be, how that will affect services and demand for services. So I fully and wholeheartedly support the views expressed by Councillor Tyler and the Select Committee and his Scrutiny Committee to raise concerns about the savings that have been presented. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Foster, do you need to make a response, Ian? Or?
No, I think I would only be making the same responses I made before, so the point is noted.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sahota.
Hello, that's it. Just an observation, really, on the report. So obviously, I've seen the reports for Children's Services and also for the Place Committee. I think what's really missing in the report was actually a more detailed information, which basically gave more narrative in terms of the implication of these job cuts, in terms of services that could be reduced, whether it be jobs or buildings being sort of closed down or services being refigured. I think that was really what was missing really with the under the Appendix C. Really, we had a narrative. This is what's going to happen, but there wasn't any sort of additional information to say as a result of these, this is how it's going to look. So I think that's something, maybe lessons learned going forward.
Thank you, Councillor. Ian?
I think there's always a judgment call about the level of detail that we put into the report, because we're always trying to balance making the report a readable document that is actually trying to summarise a lot of financial change across the whole of the organisation. Part of the purpose of the scrutiny is obviously to allow members to ask for detail and receive answers from the individual officers on the specific area. So I hope that's been achieved over the scrutiny, but I appreciate there is always that judgment call about how much detail do you put in so that you can see what the key areas of change are and ask for more detail if which understandably people will want to do.
Thank you, Ian. I suppose it goes without saying that, you know, this document is out there for scrutiny by members, and if you want to email the member responsible and Ian with questions, I dare say that they'll be happy to help you if they can. Also, of course, this it has some way to go yet in terms of debate, so we'll be seeing it again. And there are no further questions about it from this committee. So if everyone's happy, I think I'm going to leave it at that and move on to item 8. Item 8 is individual feedback from scrutiny committees. So I'll do it quite simply. Councillor Millwood, do you have any contribution you wish to make with regard to children's services?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, well, our last meeting was on the 20th of January, where we scrutinised the medium-term financial strategy, and questions were asked, and we're awaiting some further details as per Councillor Sahota's former question, because we do. I mean, I've presented 5 budgets over my lifetime. There is a lot of detail which basically you just could not trawl through. So it is quite right that we contact the officers and we ask for that breakdown of how these efficiencies are going to be achieved and what it means for the service. So there was quite an in-depth discussion there. At our last meeting as well, we also looked at the children's services customer complaints response, which is doing well with the continued scrutiny. We are getting there. We had an education report which highlighted a number of issues, not the least being the surging numbers of children who are being home educated. This has caused quite a lot of concern, and at our committee in September, I wrote to Gavin Williamson, and I'm still awaiting a response. I've since then got onto my local MP and put the questions to him for him to take to ask the minister. We now have 425 children in our borough who are homeschooled, and that's on average, it's on par with the rest of the country. It's about 1 child per 100. We have real grave concerns because there is very little national legislation concerning elective home education. To that end, I've asked for this to come to our next working group where we're really going to drill down. We're going to make recommendations to send again to government to give us more power, because we fear that children who don't have a care plan but who schools can keep their eye on are going to go under the radar, and this needs to be sorted out as a matter of urgency. So that is one of the things that came out of the education report. Also, each meeting we ask for a verbal update from the interim director, the new director, Kath Driscoll, will be starting on the 22nd of February. So we will be welcoming Kath to the authority. But we have a verbal update and where we are with COVID and the hard work that's going on within children's services, you know, to keep our eye on the children on care plans. Visits are still being carried out, obviously staff, social workers with PPE, and we make sure that, you know, as a council and as corporate parents, we are fulfilling our role, and our staff are going above and beyond, and many of them are absolutely shattered. They're on the knees, they're working very, very hard. So really, it's just, you know, I'd like to put on record our thanks from our committee for all the hard work that's going in to children's services. And really, that's about it for me at the moment. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Millwood. That was a very detailed feedback. Thank you for that. Does anyone have any questions for Councillor Millwood? No. Okay, we'll move on to corporate scrutiny then. Councillor Crumpton, do you have an update for the committee?
Yes, Chair, thank you. At the last committee meeting, we had an extremely interesting report on attendance management of all things. And I think that what we found from that was things are progressing well. And at a time when it's more difficult for managers and staff to get together, a lot more work is being done. One of the huge things that's come out of the pandemic is that actually sickness absence rates have dropped tremendously, which is almost a contradiction in terms, isn't it? So that's the one thing we looked at, and it was a much better way of dealing with the attendance management than has been the case for many years, where we simply looked at sickness rate. We looked beyond that. One of the things which came out of it was, though, that the difficulties that can be faced in some of our smaller units where dealing with street care. I think the example was given that 1 week the supervisors had a rate of COVID that was very high, and the next week the managers of those supervisors also had a rate of COVID that was very high. So it was very difficult to help people through it. We also had a report come through on really what's happening in terms of unemployment benefits and the difficulties that our people are facing because they simply don't have the resource within our benefit side of things to cope with the vast flow of work which is coming through. We've actually sent a letter of thanks to the teams that are involved in this, because when we looked at the figures, it was really quite incredible. The number of universal credit claims is going through the roof. One of the problems we have is that whilst all of the grants which have been made available to businesses and individuals are of course extremely welcome, you know, I mean, and we've got many businesses we could be going under without them. The changes in the rules around them as they moved along are causing real problems. There was something said about let's pay £500 to everybody that has to isolate. And one of the problems at the moment with people who are forced to isolate is that many of them are not entitled to any form of compensation. So of course it's fairly human nature to go back to actually work, and there were out, I think it was about 1,600 claims that had come into the council. Only around 400 were payable. So that was a really interesting piece of work that came in front of us. And finally, we as a committee looked at or asked to start to organise something around equal opportunities. We're now going to bring to our next committee meeting, after we've had myself and the Vice Chair Ed had a meeting with various people last week. We're going to organise a preliminary a preliminary paper to come out in March. We did look at it for April, but then realised that if the elections go ahead on the 6th of May, it was the sort of paper which could not have come out during a PERDA period. So we're arranging for a sort of preview of what we may wish to do as a committee next year. Now, we know we can't force things on the committees for next year, but it appears that there's quite a lot of work going to be taking place within the council anyway. around equal opportunities and the broader issues arising from those. So we'll have this preliminary paper come forward, and we'll be hoping that whatever committee it would be appropriate to would take it forward for the next year. So that's about where we are. What I'll finally say is, though, that we've had a decent year in terms of looking at things. And what we try to do is change things in the way that performance management is presented to us, and we had a preview of what that was going to be like in our last meeting, and what we'll be hoping is that various sections of the way it's newly presented will then be sent out to the various scrutiny committees, because they're delving into a bit more detail. And what we found was it was more pertinent than just a bunch of, red stars and green arrows. It gave a lot more behind the scenes focus on what was actually happening in the council. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Crumpton. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Millwood.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure whether, Tim, you were on the webinar with the new Public Health Director. Was it last week or the week before? And she flagged that issue up about the £500. But she said that they do have a fund where they can make discretionary payments. And I'm wondering whether you need to get in touch with her to see if how that can be worked. Just a thought for you. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Tim?
Actually, we did know. And although it's discretionary, we actually only had, I think, top of my head, this is, folks, about 170 awards available through it. There has been some more money made available to it. And actually, outside of my role as a committee chair, I've got quite an interest in welfare benefits. I used to work in supplementary benefits all those years ago, and I've kept an interest in it. And I've actually, I was invited to the Welfare Reform Group meeting, which takes place with a number of different bodies within the council and outside of the council sometimes. And then there was a presentation made, which I attended, a sort of webinar. I couldn't manage a public health one, but I went to that webinar, and what I've asked is that all councillors get the opportunity to receive that presentation for the welfare side of things. It was really useful. It was a taste of what's out there. In terms of the 500 quid thing, it was just the worry of these numbers, because if we've got about 3/4 of the people who are applying for these grants unable to receive them, even with the discretionary element, when you're only talking about a 2-week period of isolation, to enable people to get in there and get the money, and then if they fail at the first hurdle, to go through a second hurdle, makes it nigh on impossible for them to do. The other thing of what I've asked to do, which I had a chat with the chief executive about this, and it's going to happen now, is that when the council tax bills go out this time, there's going to be a sort of virtual take-up campaign for benefits leaflet going out within the council tax. It's something I dealt with back in 1984 with the Citizens Advice Bureau and with Dudley Council and with the Social Security people at the time. And one of the things I'm very aware of is that out there in our communities, the amount of unclaimed benefits runs into millions. And what this is going to be is it's got some detail on it. I haven't had a good look at it yet. I've asked to have a good look at it. But if it's successful, what it will mean is that a lot of people at the moment who are living on the breadline and shouldn't be, or very much below the breadline, we may be able to help in the future. It's about trying to get your foot in the door. So if we can get that out, and if councillors are a bit more armed in terms of doing this type of work and feel a bit more confidence about it, because not many do, then maybe we can do a lot more work. I know that that's not about the 500 quid, but it's a similar vein thing, isn't it? So it's something I'm desperately hoping will work. So thanks, Alan. Anyway, but I knew about it, and I've got to say, Sean and his team from the Welfare Benefits, they're playing a blinder. They really are working their socks off, and they deserve every bit of congratulations for what they're doing, and thanks. What they actually need is a bit more staff, actually. But hey, look, don't we all? in every department. You know, I mean, with what Dave Tyler said about what's going on in health and what you know in children's services, we'll never have enough staff to do everything. So, sorry, I've gone on.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Just a note, Councillor Sahota, there's a message for you on the message board if you didn't see that already, regarding an earlier question. Health and adult social care, Dave Tyler, if you would.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a very brief overview of what we did. The first thing, well, we were introduced to Karen Wright, our new Director of Health, and she gave a good account of herself. So, as it happens, I was on a board of governors at a school with her husband, so and they lived in Wallheath, so I do know them. The first official item on the agenda, our agenda, was the action tracker from our COVID response. Now, there's 32 recommendations we put in there, and if you've finished doing all your jigsaws and knitting scarves, I would recommend you look through the COVID response, and you'll see just how much hard work and graft all of our staff in the local authority have put in to make Dudley a safe place, and a well-led, well responded to by all of the staff. And I have to say, there isn't a weak link in Dudley Council's health and well-being establishment. It's absolutely brilliant, all of it. Moving on to finance, we've gone through that already. I'll make yet another plea to have a really serious hard look at health, adult social care funding for the long term. I have a concern that at some point in the future, it'll cease to be viable. And we don't want that because no one knows what's going to come down the line following the pandemic. So I'd ask the Cabinet to really think long and hard about the green paper and to look at the current finances. Now, we had a report on breast screening, and as far as Dudley Council's area is concerned, there's enough for women to worry about without having to worry about whether it's safe to go for a breast screening. And unfortunately, for whatever reasons, 378 ladies either didn't take up or postponed the invitation. Now, even if it's just a handful of ladies that could have had an issue, that's a handful too many. Our understanding was that it's a national publicity campaign for breast screening. So our CAPA is looking to see what it can do, because we have COVID champions and our networks which feed into the social media networks within our community. And if we can help out to advertise the breast screening, that it is a safe environment. And of course, if ladies don't take up this invitation, then the women who are even further back on the list get put even further back on that list. So that was an issue that we were glad to help with. The safeguarding report, well led by our resident professor and the staff. No issues whatsoever with that. A good report, an annual report, and it looks good as far as deprivation of liberty standards, and the annual safeguarding report was well received. Moving on to health and well-being. The Health and Wellbeing Board, if you look at the numbers of people who give apologies and look back through the Health and Wellbeing Board minutes, it's almost as if there's as many people giving apologies for not being at the meeting as there is at the meeting. We've already asked that this committee reviews everything to do with the Health and Wellbeing Board. And I think that's an issue because the Health and Wellbeing Board has the capacity to drive health and wellbeing of all of our residents further and at a much greater pace than it is doing at the moment. So that's that report. And our final report was all about telecare. I'll tell you, if you wanted a real lift at the end of a meeting, listen to the ladies who provide the telecare service. If someone's elderly and they're stuck at home and worried about COVID and concerned about their well-being, they'd only have to speak to someone in the telecare system and that would be lifted completely. They are a brilliant team and it was a pleasure to hear and give the report. That's me, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Tyler. Matt, you have a question?
Yep, thanks, Chair. Just to add one detail to Councillor Tyler's update, if I may. We are, through our multi-agency safeguarding hub, seeing an increased number of people who are responding directly to scam messages offering COVID vaccines in response for money. Just to advise this committee, and there will be formal comms going out to this effect as well, nobody should ever have to pay for a COVID vaccine under any circumstances, and invariably if you are being asked to pay, it is a scam. They're particularly targeting older people in the borough at the moment. So if all councillors could be aware, and we'll make sure that we get some comms messages out this week as we did last. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you for that update. Yeah, I had a note from a resident personally that I forwarded as well. Same sort of thing. I think it came by WhatsApp or something, and it was an invite to pay for a vaccine. And yes, lots of as ever, there are always people in society sitting and waiting for opportunities to make money out of misery. And I'm glad that we're on top of keeping an eye on them. Finally then, the Place Committee, if Councillor Rogers could give us an update.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Place meeting last Thursday the 28th, looking at medium-term financial strategy, everything basically relating to Place as per Cabinet report. A review of housing finance, looking at rent increases, service charges and HRA budget 21-22, and street cleansing service, overview of the service and to support the measures being undertaken to improve the service. Wednesbury to Brierley Hill Metro Extension, usual update from Jim Cunningham, and review of housing allocations, the review of the applications for council housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rogers. And any questions? I shall take that deafening silence as a no. Thank you for your update. Okay. Sorry, a message there. Oh, no, it's okay. I realise that's it. So we're on to item 9, which is to consider any questions from members to the chair where two clear.
Chair, just before we move on, we've also got a recommendation from the feedback. We're looking at seeking approval for the next meeting of the board on the 4th of March to be cancelled, and that's due to there being no items of business.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, it's in the recommendation.
Is this? Well, if there's no work to be done and the committee is happy to cancel the meeting, then that's what we should do. Does anyone have any particular point of view on that?
No.
Councillor Foster.
Yeah, cancel.
Formally seconded.
Read the COVID report instead.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay, thank you all. So, okay, we'll take that as the next meeting is cancelled. Right, I don't believe there are any questions anyway for the chair with 2 days' notice. Am I right?
None, Chair.
Okay. In that case, I'd like to thank you all for your time. I think this was the last meeting. Will then be the last meeting of the year. And it's possible that OSMB might not exist in the next year coming. So, well, thank you all for your time and effort, and we'll close the meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Good night, Chair. Good night, Chair.
All right.